Welcome, everybody. Really happy to see everyone show out. We have about 90 or so folks register online, and I think there's maybe 50 or 60 here, so it's a pretty good turnout. My name's Jerry Erickson. I'm here with the Kicking Horse Country Chamber of Commerce, and we'll be doing the opening and closing statements today. Thank you to the candidates for coming out and spending some time with us. I know it's a busy season for you, but we're really happy you could come here and chat with us all. So this election is very important, and it's clear just by the turnout that people want to hear from the candidates and what their positions are. And we've tried to select a nice blend of questions, and we think that we'll touch on many issues that are of interest. So I wanted to acknowledge that we're also on the traditional unceded territories of the Tanaka, the Shuswap, and the Shekwomek First Nations, as well as the home of the Métis Nation Columbia River Society. On a more personal note, my family came here from Sweden in the 1970s in search of a better life, came straight to Golden. And we're grateful to be guests on these traditional lands and work and play and enjoy the nature and everything else that comes with it. I'm joined here by Jessica Holden, who is the Youth Leaders and Conservation Program with CPAWS. We'll be co-moderating the session. And we also have Casey Brennan from WildSite in the back there, who's operating the online stream. And he's going to be curating a couple of questions coming from the online crowd. And so we're happy that people were participating online as well. Just some quick housekeeping for those who don't know. We have the washrooms out front and just down the hall. And emergency exits are labeled here, so if we need to use those, just be aware of them. And then just in order for the event to be safe and inclusive for all, we just wanted to set a couple of ground rules. Firstly, we don't want any hate speech, personal attacks towards candidates, or anything of that sort. We want to have productive conversations and good dialogue. We also understand that disagreement is inevitable. And so we just want to make sure that that's done in a good spirit and we have a healthy discourse for tonight. So please ensure that your phone ringers are on silent, and I've already checked mine. And please avoid flash photography, even though we have the lights up here, it gets a little distracting and we have a really tight kind of time frame that we're working within. So just an overall description of the event. We are on a tight time frame, so we'd hope you would applaud at the end after the closing statements. So the first step, we'll have the candidates do a bit of an introductory statement. They'll get about 2 minutes each. And then we have 7 prepared questions, 4 from the chamber, which kind of have sorry, everything okay? Oh yeah. Which are more economically focused, and then we have 3 from CPAWS. So we're going to ask them in an alternating way just to kind of mix it up, and hopefully that works out great. What we're going to do, it will have 90 seconds each, and then at 10 seconds, we'll ding the bell. So we're going analog here a little bit, but unfortunately, we don't have the lighting system available to us. After we do the formal questions, then we'll call Casey up, and he'll have a couple of questions for you from the online crowd, and we don't know what they are. So we'll get to hear that for the first time together. And so now, so we'll have the candidates give their opening statements. We have randomly, what do we do here? Yeah, we've randomly drawn. So Calvin, you go first, and then we'll get Scott and then Andrea. That's okay. 2 minutes. And so without further ado, over to you.
All right. Okay. Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here tonight, and thank you, everyone, for coming. So I chose to run for office because my entire life I have watched as the climate crisis has continued to get worse. Every year, climate disasters like heat domes, atmospheric rivers, and wildfires devastate our communities, and more records continue to get broken. 2023 was the hottest year on record and BC's worst wildfire season on record. Many people think of the climate crisis as an environmental issue, which it is, but in reality, it is so much more than that. Climate disasters are costing our economy billions of dollars every year. In 2021 alone, climate disasters cost our economy up to 17 billion, and climate change is raising the cost of everything from food to home insurance prices. We live in a world where there are millions of premature deaths every year because of air pollution from burning fossil fuels, not to mention the health impacts of breathing in wildfire smoke exacerbated by climate change. People's mental health is also suffering, in particular youth, because of the uncertainty in the future that they are going to inherit in this world. And more people are being diagnosed by psychologists with climate grief and ecological anxiety. Furthermore, our way of life is also at threat. There were farmers in Abbotsford in 2021 that lost all of their livestock during the atmospheric river. Salmon, one of the most culturally, ecologically, and economically important species in BC, are at risk because they can't survive in warmer water temperatures. So the climate crisis is an environmental issue, but it is also an economic issue, a public health issue, a mental health issue, a cultural issue, and most importantly, a human issue. And we need more people in office that understand the science and urgency of the situation and are willing to act accordingly. And that's why I'm here tonight.
Scott, you're up.
Thank you, everybody. It's great to be here. I just want to thank my wife for coming along with me here to Golden from Kimberley this weekend. Thank you to Jerry, CPAWS, and WildSite for putting this on. And also thank you to Andrea and Calvin. It's nice to be up here with you guys today. So I'm in this for one reason only, and it's because I love my home very much. I live in Kimberley. I have a son who's 14, and I really understand very clearly how important rural representation is in British Columbia. We almost lost this riding when the Electoral Boundaries Commission redrew the map before the 2024 election. We need more rural representation in British Columbia, not less. I know that I have the skill set, the vested interest, and the passion to represent you all, whether you vote for me or not, in Victoria on our shared issues that matter to all of us here. Make no mistake, folks, our province is in a crisis. We face a housing crisis, an affordability crisis, a toxic drug crisis, an environmental crisis, a crime crisis, a public safety crisis, and an employment crisis. So this October, when you vote, you're essentially electing, are we going to go with more of the same, or are we going to try something new? And I'm going to present a plan here for you tonight that's common sense, and I think is attractive to everybody, no matter where you sit on the political spectrum. So I want to thank you all for being here, and I appreciate your time. Ready?
Good evening, everyone. My name is Andrea Dunlop, and I have had the great privilege of growing up and spending my entire life on the land of the Secwepemc, the Shuswap, and the Akasukit people. I went to kindergarten in Golden. I started grade 1 in Nicholson, and then when my dad was transferred, I moved to Windermere, and that's where I spent the rest of my life. I graduated from David Thompson Secondary School, and I went off and got a teaching degree. However, in the 1990s, there were no teaching jobs. And I mean, I was applying to Churchill, Manitoba and Estevan, Saskatchewan. There was nothing. So I had returned home to be a waitress, and a local French teacher resigned. And I was incredibly fortunate to be able to get a teaching job in my old high school in my own hometown with my old high school teachers. That was, it had its perks. I brought my husband with me, he started an electrical company, and we built a house. We had a family, and if anyone has been there, you know, after that it was a blur. And now it was 30 years past, and I just retired from teaching in June. And then this happened. One of the most rewarding roles of a teacher is to be an advocate to their students, to ensure that they have what they need to succeed. And I believe the job of an MLA is similar. I will be an advocate for our communities and for the people who live here to ensure that we can take advantage of all the resources that we have available so our communities can grow and thrive in the future as well. I know we have some unique challenges here, and I want to be part of the solutions. My dream is that all of our children will live and enjoy their lives on this territory as much as I have.
Thank you, guys. That was great. So we're gonna get into the questions. Jump right in, right? Okay. So I get the first one, and then Jess, you'll come up for the second. Okay. So the first question is about affordability. So over the past 4 years, Canadians have seen costs increase by over 18%, and that's just CPI. There's debate about how much some things have gone up even more. Local residents are feeling the pinch, and escalating costs of almost everything are having a major impact on individuals and businesses. In some ways, the health of a community is a direct function of the health of the business community as well that operate within it. So if businesses are prospering, the local community is prospering. The reverse is also true. So helping communities thrive is in many ways a business issue. So if elected, how will your government address these rising costs and make life more affordable and business more attractive for British Columbians? So, sorry, we got our little cheat sheet here. Who's up? Scott, you're up. Okay, sorry.
Such a good question. I know everybody in here is facing the affordability challenge together. And we have several ways that we're going to address this if elected into government. It's becoming apparently clear to everybody, to most parties, that the carbon tax isn't working. We're still seeing an increase in carbon emissions in this province. I spoke to a trucker just outside of Cranbrook who owns 3 rigs. He called me on the phone, and his concern was that he spent $500,000 last year in carbon tax on his rigs. That's not just fuel cost, that's the carbon tax in the fuel cost. So I know we can't, as a province, eliminate the carbon tax right away. It's federal law. So as soon as the writ drops for the next federal election, which could happen anytime, we will be repealing the carbon tax in British Columbia. That's going to have a trickle-down effect. If you think of farmers and the amount of carbon tax they're paying, and their tractors, truckers, grocery stores, everybody's paying for it. It's a condensed tax. So we feel very strongly that with the elimination of the carbon tax, life is going to be more affordable, from the grocery store to buying a pair of shoes to basically any consumer good that we use in this province. Second piece, just thinking about time here, is we're going to expand our childcare program very extensively for $10 a day childcare. This is going to go to people who need it the most, not a random lottery system.
Thank you. Okay. I have my timer here. Oh, pardon me. Sorry, guys.
No. Do you want me to start?
We'll go, Andrea.
Okay,
Yeah,
okay.
thank you.
Okay.
Someone else come up here.
Yeah, okay.
My apologies.
One of the reasons that I am proud about running for the NDP is that they acknowledge the struggles that people are having, and then they try to find solutions that meet people where they are when they need it. For example, childcare. Childcare is one of the largest expenses young families face every month. And the NDP have created a childcare plan that is growing across the province to ensure all families will have access to $10 a day childcare. When Dave, my husband, and I had our children, the NDP government had been governing, and they had brought in a $14 a day childcare. But when Rustad's Liberals got in, they canceled it. And that cost my family thousands of dollars. The NDP government will continue to expand the $10 a day childcare program across the province. Rustad said he will cancel it. Another area where the NDP have worked to save your money is on car insurance. We live in rural BC, and most of us need vehicles to drive to and from work or school. The NDP have made some significant changes to ICBC to lower our monthly insurance costs. Every driver pays around $500 less a year for car insurance. The Conservatives would like to privatize ICBC. I'd just like you to take a moment to call any of your friends from Alberta to find out if they're paying any less for their insurance with the private system. Holy smoke, okay. I normally run out of time on this question. So anyway, I like how NDP are often look at the problem and then try to find a solution for the families when they need it.
Thank you. Sorry, Calvin, you're up.
Okay. So yeah, the BC Greens are the only party that you will hear talk about one of the root causes of the affordability crisis, which is the rising inequality that we are seeing in this province and around the world. Oil companies, grocery store companies, and real estate companies are making billions in profits while people are struggling to pay for gas, food, and rent. And the BC Greens are the only party putting forward a plan to address this. We are proposing a windfall tax, which is by definition any tax in response to historic profits from an industry on companies making over $1 billion per year. This would affect approximately 35 companies and raise $4.1 billion per year in revenue. The BC Greens would also end fossil fuel subsidies, which would save us billions of dollars every year. We could then use this money to reinvest back in communities, whether it's through a universal mental health care system, public transit, or a universal school food program. These programs will not only benefit the lives of people in those communities, but will help them save money so they can afford to support local businesses and contribute to a thriving local economy. So we've heard a lot from the other parties on the carbon tax. It is a fact that the majority of British Columbians do receive more money in rebates than they pay through the tax because it is designed to be revenue neutral. So if we take away the carbon tax, we are also taking away the rebates people are receiving. The BC Greens are focused on addressing the real causes of the affordability crisis instead of just coming up with three-word slogans that people can get behind.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for your answers and for Jerry's nice intro. Our next question might have a little bit of jargon from us in the environmental field, but I'm sure we've all heard the promises and conversations about reaching 30 by 30. Protecting at least 30% of lands and waters by 2030 is one of the fastest, most efficient ways to address the biodiversity and climate crises and support sustainable livelihoods of people across the province. A recent survey found that 85% of British Columbians support this goal. To double the current amount of protected areas in BC and reach 30 by 30, funding, capacity, and consistent and transparent processes are needed to work with First Nations and local communities on establishing a network of large, connected protected areas. If elected, how would your government work to meet or exceed the goal of protecting 30% by 2030 to protect critical ecosystems that people and wildlife depend on? And we'll start with Andrea.
Thank you very much. This was out of our order. That's why all three of us panicked looking for our answer. The NDP know that BC can have a thriving economy while protecting its land, air, and water for future generations. Since the BC NDP formed government, BC has achieved the highest average GDP growth of all the major provinces and increased our population and reduced our gas emissions by 5%. Working with First Nations, Ottawa, and local communities, BC is moving closer to a goal of protecting 30% of provincial lands by 2030. This is the single strongest step we can take to address our biodiversity loss, and it is a critical part of our climate action plan. We've worked with First Nations title holders to defer logging for over 2.4 million hectares of BC's most old growth forest, and the NDP has launched a $300 million First Nations-led conservation fund to help protect more rare forest in partnership with BC Parks Foundation. The BC NDP will meet our shared commitment to protect 30% of BC's land, water, and water by 2030 as part of our overall goal to deliver land use clarity in all of our parts of the province, focusing on long-term care land use, planning. This is so much words, I'm sorry. Long-term land use planning at a regional level, including First Nations and local governments. And I think the local part is being the most important in our community.
And Calvin.
Okay, so I think it is for this 30 by 30 target very important to acknowledge that there are areas that need protecting right now, or we risk losing them forever. Old growth forests are not something that can be replaced within our lifetimes or within the next generation's lifetimes. I want to talk about the Old Growth Strategic Review Report, which is a blueprint for how to reform the forestry industry in BC to be more sustainable and put the needs of communities before corporate profits. And the sixth recommendation in that report is immediate response to ecosystems at very high risk. This report was published in 2020, and 4 years later, we still have not implemented the recommendations of this report. We also need to immediately protect habitat for endangered species, including orca whales, the spotted owl, and the woodland caribou that are at risk of being lost forever if we don't take immediate action. And we need to identify the areas with the highest biodiversity and make sure those areas are included in the 30 by 30 target. It's also important that Indigenous peoples are consulted on the 30 by 30 target, and that we are establishing Indigenous protected and conserved areas where Indigenous governments have a primary role in protecting and conserving ecosystems through Indigenous laws, governance, and knowledge systems. And we are establishing new provincial parks that create sustainable jobs in ecotourism, including with First Nations, to educate people on biodiversity and conservation.
Great, and to Scott.
Thank you. So the Conservative Party of BC gets a lot of negative news about our policy around First Nations moving forward. For those of you who have read the policy, our economic reconciliation plan, it's actually very robust and something I'm very proud of. What we're going to promise to do is to give back 20% of BC's forests to First Nations in BC, not only to manage the forests in accordance with their traditional cultural ways, which promotes biodiversity, no doubt, but also so that they can reap the economic benefits of that land in a way that they see fit, which is in accordance with the United Nations Declaration of Rights on Indigenous People. The second thing that we're going to do is to continue to maintain that 2/3 of BC's forests never get touched for industrial logging. That's really important, I think, to all three of us. I would like to see that taken a step further into legislation, but it's really important as forests are obviously part of our identity here in British Columbia, and it's extremely important that we protect them. So thank you.
All right, and I'll pass it back to Jerry.
So the next question is about addressing the labor and housing challenges. So one of the most critical issues we face as a province is to ensure we have the people we need, with the training required to meet our needs today and in the future. The issue is being felt across the entire economy and is further exacerbated by rising housing costs and inadequate housing supply. Many people simply cannot afford to live where they want to work, and many businesses have been forced to invest in worker housing to keep their businesses open. So if elected, what is your party's priority with respect to addressing the labor challenges we face today? And how would your government encourage more business investment, more housing supply, and higher wages in British Columbia? Sorry, I don't have the list.
It's me. Yeah.
Calvin, you guys know. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Okay, so the approach from governments to addressing the housing crisis has been to leave it to the private sector. And we have seen this has not been effective in addressing the housing needs of communities. Real estate companies and financialized landlords exist to make a profit, not to provide affordable housing for people. And if we really want to do that, government needs to take an active role in doing so. The BC Greens are the only party that would introduce legislation to formally recognize housing as a fundamental human right. We would provide $1.5 billion to build 26,000 new units of non-market housing per year. We are also the only party talking about vacancy control, which is something we could do right now to protect renters. Vacancy control would prevent landlords from unfairly evicting tenants for the sole purpose of increasing rent. BC has the highest eviction rate in Canada, and most evictions are for no at-fault reasons. We would also advocate the federal government for legislation to ban the sale of residential units to real estate investment trusts, which are companies that buy up real estate to generate a profit for investors. And we would make sure new buildings are efficient and are using heat pumps for heating and cooling instead of fossil fuels to reduce climate pollution and help owners and renters save money on energy. By recognizing housing as a human right, we can help businesses thrive and their employees to make sure they have a place to live and ensure companies don't have to invest in worker housing themselves.
Scott?
Thank you. That was a loaded question of like 4 questions in one. So I'm going to tackle just one piece of it. For those of you in the audience that are old enough to remember the late 1970s and early 1980s, there was a really excellent program that the federal government brought in called the Multi-Unit Residential Building Program. Now, the system is broken as far as, building residential units in this province. We've seen homelessness up almost 35% in the last 7 years. We need to build rental homes. Now, with the MURB, I know it's a funny word, the idea is that for people to build, and I'm talking about developers, to build rental housing, there's not a lot of incentive there to do that because it's a huge upfront cost and they don't reap, a return on their investment for often up to 40 or 50 years. So what the MURB does is it allows developers to offset their costs through tax incentives on other forms of income. So they have the upfront cost, but they're saving money on other parts of their business. Now, I'm probably different from my colleagues up here that we believe that there is a solution in the private sector for this. We think less government control of housing is very important, with a MURB being a huge step forward into that. We want to work with the federal government on this, but if they don't want to play ball, we're going to do it ourselves. But what we saw in the 70s and 80s was a tremendous increase in rental housing across this province, and it was very, very successful. Thank you.
Andrea?
Going door to door, one of the 2 topics I hear from everyone was childcare and housing in every community. It is by far one of the biggest concerns people in this riding. And because the lack of affordable housing is affecting every industry. We don't have enough substitute teachers in Windermere. There's not enough care aides, and it's not because there's not enough out there. It's just they can't afford to live in our communities it's because of the quantity as well as the availability of affordable housing. So the NDP have committed to finding solutions to address these concerns or these problems. They are changing legislation so communities can infill their communities in and up, which allows them to connect to the infrastructure that's already been built, your roads, your sewers, your water, that brings down the cost of construction for those homes. They are ensuring that there's more training spots in our schools because we need the people to build these houses in our community. And that means we need more construction workers with training. They are also incentivizing factory-built homes to speed up the delivery of these homes into our communities as quickly as possible. BC is building 2.5 times more houses per capita than Ontario at the moment, but we do have a long way to go. And we need to give these programs a chance and not cancel them as Rustad has promised he would do.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. Our next question talks about water conservation. And droughts are becoming increasingly more common across the province, and recent data from the University of Lethbridge has shown a drying trend in one of our globally designated sites of importance, the Columbia Wetlands. As a wetlands technician with experience working in this area, I know there are many challenges to managing water conservation and ecosystem health in a changing climate, including lack of funding for critical long-term studies, long-term monitoring and data gaps, and management plan implementation and gridlock. If elected, how will your government address these challenges and implement on-the-ground solutions to the water and biodiversity crisis in these ecosystems?
And I think it's my turn. Thank you. That's a really good question. Obviously, water is a key resource here for us in Columbia River Revelstoke, and we need to protect it. I've been fortunate enough to talk with a couple of local groups, most recently the Columbia Shuswap Invasive Species Society. And we have a couple of very serious issues knocking at our door, one of them being invasive mussels in our waterways and the other being whirling disease. I'm an avid fisherman. I spend a lot of my time in the summertime with my feet in the water fishing. And I know how devastating these will be to our local pristine waterways. So as your MLA, I'm going to continue to work closely with these groups who know absolutely best what to do to keep measures in place to ensure that our waters are clean and healthy moving forward. Another thing that our party is going to do provincially is we're going to set up a research chair to conduct ongoing studies of the health and sustainability of our waterways moving forward. You know, we have to monitor water accordingly in this province to see, you know, obviously the cleanliness, how much we have, and you know, the last piece being, you know, as our MLA here, the biggest piece moving forward is obviously the Columbia River Treaty. You know, it's very, very important that we protect our waterways here, that we keep water in Canada because the Americans want it very badly. So I will fight to the death to ensure that that doesn't happen.
Thank you.
The majority of the water in the Columbia River and in that wetland come from our glaciers. And anyone who does any hiking in the region knows how that has changed when you go out back. I used to go hiking at the Lake of the Hanging Glaciers hike. And if anyone goes there now, they're probably wondering why they call it that. Just last week, the Ski and Snowboard Federation had a meeting with the UN Weather Agency because they're trying to figure out where they're going to hold their competitions in the future. And again, last week, some research came out of Alberta because of their glaciers there, because of all the soot from the forest landing on the glaciers are melting faster than expected. So I can't even imagine our valley without the Columbia River. And that means we need to look after our glaciers. To protect them, we must protect them. And to do that, we're going to have to reduce our CO2 emissions. And to reduce the amount of soot we put up in the air. We have to reduce how much our forests are burning in the summer as well. BC is continuing to reduce our carbon pollution through a cap on harmful emissions from oil and gas sector. We are on track to exceed the 2025 targets of reducing methane emissions from oil and gas sector by 45%. And we will build on this continent-leading progress by driving the adoption of innovative, zero-emitting technology and best practices, achieving a 75% reduction by the industry by 2030.
Good finish. And over to Calvin.
Okay, so it's crucial that we let communities take the lead when it comes to water conservation. The BC Greens would commit $100 million to create and establish watershed boards in every community, including with representatives from First Nations, farmers, industry, and environmental groups. We would help streamline the Water Sustainability Act by setting clear environmental and critical flow thresholds for water ecosystems and implement stronger protection and monitoring of drinking water. And we would improve the Ministry of Environment's ability to enforce water use regulations. We would work to leverage federal funding to create a $1 billion endowment for the BC Watershed Security Fund and provide $75 million annually after that. We would mandate that municipalities install water meters to track water usage and fund and implement a BC flood strategy by 2027 and invest in water storage reservoirs and restoring wetlands to enhance water retention. It's also important that we are talking about one of the largest users of water in this province, which is the oil and gas sector. Each fracking well uses between 5 to 30 million liters of water, and there are thousands of gas wells in BC. The BC Greens would stop giving out new permits for fracking wells and strengthen the rules and regulations of water use by industry, including requiring companies to treat and reuse their wastewater and restricting water usage during periods of drought.
Thank you.
Our next question is about forest practices reform. So almost all the communities in the Columbia River Revelstoke riding are dependent on forestry. And within the Kootenay economic region where we are, the forest sector generates 1.4 billion in GDP and supports nearly 8,000 jobs. This is notable because with dropping harvest levels, mill closures, and curtailments, we saw the loss of 10,000 jobs in British Columbia in 2023 alone. Harvest levels have been dropping due to several factors, including land use policy change in response to climate change, natural disturbance such as pests and wildfire, and the escalating costs of operations. Many experts feel that tenure reform is needed and more area needs to be set aside for Indigenous participation and community forests. If elected, what is your plan to support the forest sector? And how will you create space for more Indigenous participation, support for community forest agreements, or tenure reform overall?
Thank you. I was so happy they put this question in because one of the reasons I want this job and sought this job is because the health and the management of our forests. I live in Invermere and well, you guys live in Golden. Each summer is how it is filled with anxiety. This summer, it was even more intense this summer, again, for you guys this summer. Your bags are packed, your gas tank is always full. The summers are not enjoyable. We look at our forests now as a threat rather than the joy they should be. For locals, it seems like the solution is simple. We just need to thin the forest around our communities and remove the fuel so the fires will not be so intense, and in the process create healthier forest, more wildlife habitat, wildlife corridors, and ensure a more sustainable logging industry. The NDP platform states it will support community forests as they recognize local expertise is required for this incredibly complex issue where so many different stakeholders need to be at the table to make decisions for the long-term health and welfare of our forests. I will be that advocate because I understand the urgency of this issue in our local communities.
In the Old Growth Strategic Review Report, which I mentioned earlier, that still hasn't been implemented by the provincial government after 4 years. The first recommendation in that report is Indigenous involvement. And there are a number of ways the authors recommend on how to work towards this, including establishing support programs for Indigenous groups to build forest management expertise and developing criteria for government-to-government relationships between the province and First Nations. Community forests like the Golden and Area A Community Forest Initiative are a great way to transfer tenure from large corporations to communities and First Nations. This is why the BC Greens would dedicate 20% of the annual allowable cut in the province towards community forests. We also need to come to grip with the fact that we can't continue what we are doing in BC when it comes to forestry. Companies are literally running out of wood to harvest. And if we truly want to support a sustainable forestry industry well into the future, we can't continue to have clear-cut logging like we are right now. Instead, we need to switch to more sustainable practices like selective logging. And while we absolutely need to support workers and communities, we also need to look forward to the future, which is a service-based and knowledge-based economy, and an economy where we don't export raw products, but instead produce and manufacture them here to keep the jobs in this province.
Thank you. It's no secret that our forest industry is in trouble. I've talked to a lot of loggers in the last 6 months as a candidate. And we have a lot of challenges here. We have the best loggers in the world here in Columbia River Revelstoke, and a lot of them are very anxious about losing their jobs. I've read a lot of reports where we have First Nation approval, permitting is set to get ready to go, and the papers get shuffled around the bureaucratic desk in the Ministry of Forests. Things are not getting done. We also have a problem with the model of how our forest industry works. We export way too many raw logs. Okay, so what happens is the finished products, agreeing with Calvin on this, don't get produced here in British Columbia. So sawmills close. Okay, we are putting forward a plan, a credit system where companies who produce more value-added products of their fiber are going to pay less tax than companies who are exporting raw logs. That's going to keep the jobs here. It's going to keep people employed, and it's going to boost our forest sector back to a place where it was not so long ago. Thank you.
Okay, and for our last question from CPAWS, we're going to ask about a paradigm shift. So unsustainable forestry and land management practices are putting wildlife populations at risk of extinction and contributing to economic and job uncertainties. Experts have recommended a paradigm shift that would include a biodiversity law to prioritize ecosystem health across all industries. Work has been underway to make this a reality, including months of consultation with industry and community stakeholders and First Nations across BC. If elected, how would you and your government prioritize a new approach to managing natural resources to prioritize biodiversity and ensure local communities can thrive for generations to come?
Okay, so there are many benefits to forests beyond just resource extraction. Flood mitigation, prevention of soil erosion, climate mitigation, recreation, and tourism being some of them. So we need a strong ecosystem health and biodiversity law that includes timber supply as just one of the many benefits of forests. The second recommendation in the Old Growth Strategic Review Report is protect ecosystem health and resilience. And this framework needs to be guided by science to ensure the long-term sustainability of both the forestry industry and forest ecosystems in this province, because the two go hand in hand. And we also need to extend this to all land-based sectors in BC to improve the overall chances of ecosystem health goals in this province. We still have no provincial law to protect endangered species in BC. We are one of 2 provinces in Canada that still don't. BC has the highest biodiversity in Canada and is home to more species at risk than any other province. We need species at risk legislation to protect species like the spotted owl, orca whale, and woodland caribou that are at risk of being lost forever. We also need to support our workers and First Nations communities along the way, including being compensated for old growth logging deferrals, requiring socio-economic plans for areas affected by layoffs, and implementing policies and programs aimed at promoting local manufacturing.
Thank you for the question. Still today, there are tens of thousands of hectares which are sprayed aerially with glyphosate, which is Roundup. The Conservative Party of British Columbia is going to end that practice immediately. Glyphosate is used to eliminate other species except for single tree species which are of value to regrow. This is a problem for ranchers. This is a problem for, obviously, for biodiversity in our forests. We're going to put an end to that immediately. The second thing that we're going to do on this topic, it's a challenging one, but we need to have a better science-based approach to our wildlife management. Often these decisions around hunting, whether it's limited entry or open season hunting, is made based on social factors in Vancouver. People that have no idea about what the animal and wildlife populations are outside of the Lower Mainland. So we have to take a better science-based approach to that. And the Conservative Party of BC, if elected into government, will do absolutely just that. The last piece I want to talk about, because I know I don't have much time, is protecting all of our communities here are vulnerable to devastating complex wildfires. So in addition to our logging and forestry plan, we're going to do a much better job thinning forests around all of our vulnerable communities and planting a much better diverse group of species to slow fires down before they get here. Thank you.
The BC NDP Party has stated in its platform that they will work to protect biodiversity and critical ecosystem alongside First Nations, communities, workers, industry, organizations, and the public. Through this collaborative work, BC will break from outdated conservation models and will objectively set and deliver on science-based targets to protect water and natural systems. The BC NDP worked with the Green Party to create Clean BC plan. It is the most ambitious climate plan on the continent, and it is working to reduce emissions. We are using the government's spending power to reduce costs on solar panels and heat pumps for consumers, increasing energy efficiency for all of our homes and businesses. Because of these incentives, British Columbians will be choosing energy-saving cars and heat sources, not only because it will protect our environment, but because it'll be more economical.
Okay, it's the last one from us, and then we'll bring up Casey for a couple of other questions. So this question is about economic diversification and incentivizing innovation. Economic diversification is tightly linked to community resilience. And as a resource and tourism town, there are limits to what is possible without government intervention and visionary leadership. Technological innovation has produced some of the most valuable companies and some of the best jobs on the planet. And with the rise of remote work, we can do more with less and grow innovative companies right here in the Valley. If elected, how will you support economic diversification in the region, and what specific actions will you take?
Thank you for that question. As I have the pleasure of touring farmers markets around the riding, it's obviously evidently clear probably to everybody here that we have fantastic small and medium-sized agricultural producers here in Columbia River Revelstoke. We need to invest in our farmers a little bit better. We import 2/3 of our food in British Columbia. That makes us extremely vulnerable, and we don't do enough to help our local producers. So we have a very robust plan called Grown in BC, where we're going to be investing very heavily in local food production here in Columbia River, Revelstoke, and throughout the province. We're going to invest heavily in research and development for climate resilient crop production. We're also going to launch a really cool land access program for small farmers to be able to access land through subsidies that they will have tax relief for renting land and additional to their current properties in order to expand their operations if they see fit. We need to help our farmers here locally, okay? The second piece we're going to look at for diversification of our economy. Like I said about our economic reconciliation plan, again, we are going to provide loan guarantee programs to local First Nations. And speaking with one of my friends from Akiskanook the other day, him and I agreed that we need to put the economic horse ahead of the social cart when it comes to reconciliation with First Nations. So we're going to provide loan guarantees so that they can develop the resources how they see fit, and again, reap 100% of the economic benefits for their local nations. Thank you.
Again, one of my motivations for becoming MLA is to improve forest management. And obviously I did a lot of talking, as you did, with loggers and as many people as I could, to finding we know there's solutions out there. So in my discussions, I was given a piece of that material. It's on that first table there. It is a product that he's a builder from Invermere. He gave it to me. It's a product that he uses to wrap around his homes in Invermere. It replaces styrofoam. You've probably seen houses wrapped in styrofoam. It has the same R value as styrofoam, but styrofoam loses its R value when it's really cold, minus 40 or plus 40. This keeps it. It is fire resistant. It is soundproof. It is, and I think they make it all over Europe. And I was going to make sure I haven't picked any other facts about it. It is actually, and it is carbon negative. I'm going to say that it's carbon negative, unlike styrofoam. It is made from, we make it from what we would have considered waste material from our forests. It turns a waste material into a marketable product. Right now, there's only one place in North America doing it. It's Hewlett-Packard on the East Coast of the United States. We could be industry leaders in Western Canada. We would further be reducing our carbon footprint, as the waste material would not be burned in our forests. And the soot, reducing the soot we put in our air. This could be a new industry for our region that could bring new jobs and turn our homes into carbon capture sites. Another important industry that I would like to see expanded in our region is outdoor recreation. Idaho has a population of 1 million people and has an outdoor recreation industry of $7 billion. We could do the same.
So that's it for us.
I still have to answer.
Oh, sorry, Calvin, man.
It's all right. Okay. So I would like everyone to try and imagine a province where instead of subsidizing large industries like fracking and mining like we are right now, that we instead invest that money into communities and small businesses instead. That's the future that we would like you to envision at the BC Green Party. We would invest 50 million into a Youth Climate Corps program to help create jobs for youth entering the workforce. We would work with the construction industry to create a training program for people to retrofit buildings to make them more efficient, and introduce a careers program for the food, beverage, and hospitality sector to provide job seekers with training, mentorship, and job placements in BC. We would also make sure that local contractors are prioritized when it comes to public and government projects. We would expand the NBC investment opportunity with a focus on rural areas, and expand and amend the community grants program funded by the carbon tax to prioritize local businesses with headquarters in BC. We would also expand the Clean BC Advanced Research and Support Program to provide support and mentoring to innovators of companies that are developing electric vehicles to encourage international investment in the electric vehicle sector in BC, and expand the Clean Incentive Vehicle Program to allow retrofitted vehicles to be eligible for grants, making it easier for small businesses that want to electrify their fleet to cut down on fuel costs.
Thank you all. Casey, here we are. So here's our online questions.
Thanks. Thanks to our online participants. We had over 60 folks join us online, so that's great, well worth doing. And we had a number of questions. The most popular sort of theme areas were around environment, not surprisingly, given the sponsorship of the event, but also Indigenous relations. So the first question is related to that. And I don't know if we have an order for this, but yeah. How, you go first. Okay, we do have an order. Fantastic. How are you and your party working to strengthen relationships with First Nations? Do you and your party support the Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act and a clear path to truth and reconciliation, including continued support for the Truth and Reconciliation Day?
Yes. Yes, we would obviously support the Truth and Reconciliation Day, although I don't think truth and reconciliation is something you celebrate on a day. I think that is something that we are living with every day, all the time. We need to be working on that. We, the NDP have stated they will continue to support UNDRIP and ensure that all of our practices on the land are in free, prior, and informed consent with our Indigenous partners.
Okay. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, there's still a lot of work that we need to do toward reconciliation in this province, and a lot of damage that has been done from colonization and residential schools. So one thing we would do would be to enact an Indigenous Languages Act to ensure that Indigenous cultures are being protected and their languages are being preserved. We would also help educate public servants on the rights and laws of Indigenous peoples, including residential schools, treaties, Indigenous law, and Indigenous Crown relations. And we would make sure that Indigenous rights are factored into different decisions in the province in relation to the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People and DRIPA, including with the Land Use Act. Right now, First Nations, whenever there is a conflict, their solution is to go to court, litigation, which is costly and timely for them and for the government. And to ensure that Indigenous rights and land rights are inherent, we need to work towards the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People in all legislation, including the Land Act, which both other parties refuse to do.
Is there just one additional question?
Two.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. So, yeah, obviously the United Nations Declarations of Rights for Indigenous People is extremely important. And the Conservative Party of BC, if elected to government, is going to continue to use that as a guiding principle. As I've stated, we are going to provide First Nations with an economic, brighter future path forward. In addition to other social programs that will be very helpful for local communities and nations as well, including providing safe access treatment centers within traditional territories and within bands so that people that need help don't have to go to the big city to get it. They can do it right there in their home community. So, you know, we have to make sure moving forward with a truth and reconciliation that it keeps progressing forward. So yes, we will be using the United Nations Declaration of Rights for Indigenous People as a guiding principle.
Great. The next question, as I sort of hinted, is about the environment, not surprising. And this one's specifically on climate change. There were a number of different questions that came in on climate change. This is a bit of a smosh of at least 4 different questions. With the increasing impact of climate change, what approaches and specific plans do you and your party support to reduce the use of fossil fuels, including the support for a consumer carbon tax, continued support for a consumer carbon tax? And how will you and your party work to meet BC's legislated climate targets of net zero by 2050 and interim targets for an interim target that's coming up very quickly for 2030 as well? Do we know who's going first this time? Kelvin.
I'll go. Okay. Yeah, so I think the really easy answer on this one is to not continue to prop up the fossil fuel industry anymore, which is exactly what we are doing. The provincial government is still giving billions in dollars in subsidies to this industry. And we know that if we want to address the climate crisis, we have to transition to cleaner energy sources. And there is no way in the future where we can reconcile both fossil fuel expansion and climate action at the same time. So all those subsidies that we are giving to the fossil fuel industry could be money that we are investing into clean energy, energy efficiency, and public transit, which the BC Greens are pushing for free public transit across this province. Another thing is advertisements, fossil fuel advertisements in BC. We continue to let fossil fuel companies advertise and greenwash their products when we know the health and climate impacts of their products is causing serious social and ecological harm. Just like we banned advertisements for tobacco companies, we should do the same for fossil fuel companies, which are arguably doing a lot worse. So we need to go all in on clean energy sources. We can't continue to pretend like we are doing something on the climate crisis and supporting fossil fuels at the same time. That just isn't possible.
Sure.
No questions on healthcare. Okay. Yeah, so we don't support the continuation, obviously, of a carbon tax. I read the 2023 climate action report from the NDP, and carbon emissions have risen since 2020. So obviously putting a tax on people isn't working. We strongly believe that mandates and taxation on people isn't an effective way for a cleaner, greener future. It's going to come through innovation. So we need to support our tech industries. We need to support our small businesses to find tangible solutions out of this problem. But obviously, like we stated, you know, people having to pay an exorbitant amount of tax isn't going to solve anything.
I agree that innovation is incredibly important, but again, it has to, and many times it has to be directed by a government. They have to give assistance to the innovation, make sure they're helping pay for those that pay for the innovation to ensure that people can gain the cost and the value of it afterwards. For example, right now, BC Hydro is ensuring that we have power on every 150 kilometers on our highways. If people know we have that, then they'll start using electric vehicles. They're also supporting the generation of more electric vehicles in our province. They are, again, putting a cap on the oil and gas sector on how much and making sure that they're going to be zero emitting technology or 75% reduction, sorry, by 2030. This isn't going to be done. This is going to end up being done by us. We are the ones that are going to have to start making the changes, and we're going to have to make the changes because it makes sense to do it. We're going to not only be for our environment, but for economic reasons. We're going to pay a little extra, for example, to put that board on our house, but it's going to make sense to us. And and our government's role is to ensure that we can, and we have the choices to do that. We need to make sure we bring the innovation to our communities.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for those questions. And thank you guys for entertaining some wild cards there. That was really great. We have some closing arguments. We'll each give you 2 minutes. I don't have the order sheet for that. They have it. You guys are better organized than me. So yeah, let's hear what you guys got to say.
Oh, effective leaders make goals for themselves. And as an MLA, I want to increase the housing supply to all of our communities, to increase the affordability of homes and the availability of, the affordability and the ability of homes and the ability for communities and businesses to grow and allow our children the opportunities to live and work here. 2, I would like access to $10 a day childcare to spread throughout our region and take that very heavy financial burden off of families. 3, I would like our communities to be surrounded in forests that are healthier, more resilient to fire, have incorporated wildlife habitat and corridors where watersheds are protected and we have spaces for recreation. And we have created a new and emerging industry that will bring more wealth to our area using the products we pull out of our forests, creating more jobs with every log. And finally, number 4, I would like to see the expansion of our outdoor recreation industry. This means an investment in multi-use trails, new campgrounds, stores that rent, fix, and sell bikes, canoes, and backcountry guiding. This is a low carbon emitting industry with a powerful financial kick. It would enhance the lives of those people living here and create more diverse economy. I can learn, I can communicate, and I will be a very good advocate for our region in Victoria. I grew up here, and I want my children and your children to thrive here in the future as well. Thank you.
Okay, so one thing in our platform that I want to talk about is what's called the well-being framework. So governments traditionally have used GDP as a measure of success in society. And this assumes that all spending is good no matter what the outcome is. So right now, our GDP goes up when more people get sick and go to private healthcare clinics, or when we cut down the last of our old growth forests, or when more homes are burnt down and are rebuilt after wildfires. And this is a fundamental problem with how we measure success in society. The BC Greens are proposing a British Columbia well-being framework that provides measurement across 4 indicators: people, nature, infrastructure, and society. Examples of well-being frameworks include the United Nations Human Development Index, and well-being frameworks are already being used in countries like New Zealand. Another thing I want to touch on is the state of our democracy here in BC and Canada. Under our first past the post voting system, people are forced to vote for a party that they think has the best chance of defeating the party they fear the most, instead of voting for a party that most aligns with their values. And that is, in essence, a flawed democracy. First past the post gives us majority governments with less than 40% of the votes. That's why the BC Greens would implement proportional representation, like a lot of other developed countries have already done, to make sure every vote matters, no matter where you live and who you vote for, because that is how a democracy is supposed to work. Lastly, taking action on the climate crisis is absolutely necessary to mitigate further climate damages, but the reality is there are so many benefits beyond that. By investing in clean energy, public transit, energy efficiency, conservation, ecological restoration, and local food production, we can create good jobs, clean up our air and water, and help people save money. As the world moves to a post-carbon society, we cannot afford to be left behind, There is simply too much at stake.
Thanks again. Just in closing to touch on a couple of things. Again, thank you to my opponents here for your time, and Jerry and everybody else, and thank you all for coming. Throughout the last 6 months on this wild journey that I've personally been on as a candidate, a lot of things have been made very clear to me as far as what it takes to be an excellent MLA. Obviously, first and foremost, you have to be a fantastic listener. You have to be able to build relationships with other people. Okay. If you're in opposition or in government, you have to work with people on the other side of the aisle. The last piece is you have to be an extremely hard worker. I hope that as we get to know each other over the campaign trail, you will believe in those abilities that I can possess to be your next MLA in Victoria and represent our collective interests at the big table. I'll be the person that'll put my hand up and say, this doesn't work for the 35,000 people in Columbia River Revelstoke. So I hope I can gain your trust. People have told me along the trail the past 6 months, what they don't want is an MLA that thinks they knows everything and speaks for them. They want an MLA that's willing to listen and speaks on their behalf. So thank you very much.
Thank you all. How about a round of applause for our candidates? So on behalf of the Kicking Horse Chamber of Commerce, I want to thank you all for coming out tonight, and a big thank you to our candidates again. I know it's busy and it's hard to carve out a few minutes, but I think as the Golden Knights really appreciate it. So thank you again. I wanted to also thank Jess from Canadian Parks and Wilderness Society and Casey from Wildsight. We kind of put this event together very quickly, and we could not have done it without everyone chipping in. So I'm really, really grateful for that. And yeah, I just wanted to thank you all for coming out, and the 70 people or so that are online watching as well. It's a great turnout, and it means that you care and that you want to hear what the MLA candidates have to say. So yeah, I think it's important that maybe you have a moment to chat with folks if you have some time later. We have some tables set up on the side where you can meet with candidates one-on-one and have a couple minutes. And yeah, just have a safe evening. Thank you for coming. And yeah, the tables are over there. So thank you all.